So we all know that accessibility is everyone's responsibility, and regardless of your job role, we can all play a part, right? The problem I see as an industry that I've worked in for 23 years is unfortunately overlooking accessibility way too often. Uh, some agencies are approaching accessibility purely as a coding issue to ensure that users with assistive technology can navigate, but some just don't consider it at all. But here's the thing: 78% of the success criteria of WCAG relates to the design. But in my opinion, even with that baseline and when it's met, the vast majority of websites out there are still widely inaccessible to many. So there's a common belief that accessible means boring, but it really isn't. It's beautiful because it's usable, engaging, and pleasing. And so many sites delight with calm without all the unnecessary so called chaotic creativity. And in the fast paced digital world where screens dominate our lives, the impact of web design on mental health is profound and often underestimated. Design choices such as color themes, typographies, and layouts can significantly influence our emotional state and well being. So, in an era where digital stress, sorry, is a massive concern. Creating calm interfaces, in my opinion, is not just a design trend, it's actually a necessity. Sensory design hinges on the understanding, excuse me, that experiences are intrinsically multisensory. So each sense, whether it be sight, sound, smell, touch, or taste, offers a unique pathway to connect with the user. Sensory design is the careful art of balancing designing specifically to engage a user's senses, but without overwhelming them. It's defined in the Human Centered Design Standard, which says that sensory design must be furthering human health and well-being. Uh, I'm going to call it SBD from now on. So, sensory processing disorder can affect individuals in various ways. For me, it's hypersensitivity to sensory stimuli, causing discomfort, pain, and confusion because everything in my head is the same volume. So, I can be in a room with 100 people, and the conversations 2 tables down is just as loud and clear as the person sitting next to me. So I can't filter out the background noise to let me concentrate on the question being directed, meaning I miss out, obviously, a lot of conversation and get frustrated and anxious. And to be honest, social situations can fill me with so much anxiety that at times I actively avoid them. And marketing and communication is no different. So the live chat popping up as I'm trying to fill in your contact form, or the animation loop that sits above your body copy, I cannot mute or ignore these distractions, meaning I miss out on your messaging, get anxious trying to complete, and most likely make mistakes when I'm distracted. So if you want your visitors to focus on one task, take away the distracting components and visual clutter. If a user can focus on one thing at a time without pop ups appearing, it will reduce their anxiety. So, in digital design, UX can be used to accommodate users with SPD in several ways. So, use simple and intuitive interfaces with clear navigation to reduce cognitive load and confusion. Provide options to adjust sensory elements such as brightness, contrast, sound levels, pausing animations, etc., to suit individual preferences and sensitivities. Maintain consistency in layout, color schemes, and design elements to create a predictable and therefore comfortable user experience. Provide clear and descriptive feedback for the user's actions to help them understand their interactions with the interface. Confusing navigation can lead to frustration and stress. Intuitive menus and clear pathways help users find what they're looking for without all unnecessary clicks. Predictable navigation builds a sense of control and calm, empowering users and reducing the feeling of being overwhelmed. Keep navigation menus as simple as possible and avoid too many categories and subcategories. Use clear and descriptive labels for navigation terms and obviously avoid jargon or technical terms that people aren't familiar with. Use plain language and avoid overwhelming sensory stimuli such as flashing lights or loud noises. If you've got a promo video and you need your visitors to listen to your voiceover, this is really, really common. Make sure your music bed is much quieter so that it doesn't compete with your senses. If you need your visitor to read information about your services in a brochure, simply break content down with a clear hierarchy of key messages, headlines, copy, and bullets. Honestly, life with a processing disorder is so exhausting. Your senses are being used all the time, and it's not something that you can simply just switch off. But when you tell your brand story, you can 100% ensure your messaging is clear and understandable without distractions. And in my opinion, designing for SPD can only bolster your conversion rates. So, the American researcher and professor Don Norman said, it's not enough that we build products that function, that are understandable and usable. We also need to build products that bring joy and excitement, pleasure and fun, and yes, beauty to people's lives. Now, he didn't say go forth and animate every single interaction you possibly can, but sometimes when I browse design award sites or design agency portfolios, it really does feel like this is how it's being interpreted. And all those times you had so called positive, delightful experiences using a website or app, there were potentially millions of people who didn't, who had the polar opposite effect and were left feeling frustrated and excluded. So I follow a large global corporate brand whose website, in my opinion, is not just accessible but downright dangerous. I visited their website and it had a full screen flashing background and which auto played on the homepage. Now it affected me massively with my photophobia and photosensitivity, but although it caused me extreme pain, luckily my photosensitivity doesn't cause potentially life-threatening seizures. So I know someone who worked there, so I formed them right away. But unfortunately, they shortly after left the company. So I contacted someone else who I knew worked there and had connections there. They got back to me immediately and said it would be sorted instantly and would confirm once addressed. Now, this guy didn't technically directly work in that team, but they worked for the same brand in the same office, and the person was disabled. So I knew it would be sorted. 6 months on, I hadn't heard anything, so I checked and noticed it was unchanged. So I got in contact again, but this time I got zero response. And in my opinion, they've 100% broken any brand loyalty that I had for them, as well as, to be honest, anyone else I've spoken to about them now. I don't see them or their wider umbrella brand as a company I associate with positively. We need to remember 600,000 people in the UK have epilepsy. That's about one in every 100 people. Flashing videos without warnings isn't just negligent, but seen as discriminatory by the entire epilepsy community. This, in turn, can be damaging to your reputation and, of course, the brand or company who owns that content. So, flashing content is a huge barrier to accessibility for people with photosensitivity epilepsy or other conditions like myself. So, to make content more accessible, I'll be honest, it's best just to avoid all flashing altogether. But if for some reason it 100% is necessary, here's some guidelines that I would recommend. Warning. Now, this is probably this is 100% the most important. If flickering is essential, warn users before they reach it and give them the option to choose to opt out. This is no different, in my opinion, than people giving trigger warnings in their content subjects, so you can choose to ignore if you need to. Provide a way to stop flashing content before it starts. Um, Even reducing the number of flashes can make a huge difference. So reduce the number, regardless of whether they violate the threshold. The less flashing, the better. You can also look to reduce the contrast of the flashing content because the higher contrast, the more effect it has. The one I witnessed from the brand was the worst. It was pure black and white. And red flashing is most likely to affect people than any other colour, so avoid that. Now, broadcast videos must be checked to ensure that they are not triggering for anyone with epilepsy or any other conditions. But online, it seems anything goes. It really doesn't. Full screen autoplay videos are, in my opinion, carbon guzzling, annoying, symptom inducing, unnecessary UI decisions that are harmful and put people at risk. These brands simply don't care. They would prefer to be seen as creative than put people's safety first, and things need to change. So, how many senses does everyone think we have? 5, right? So, you've got sight, taste, hear, smell, and touch. But actually, there's more than the main 5 senses. Digital design, however, routinely ignores neurological factors beyond sight. So, experts hypothesize that humans possess between 9 and 33 distinct senses. Unfortunately, most designers attempt to establish these ties through sight and sound alone, as if we're all just eyes and ears. And that obviously makes sense. The practical constraints of digital devices make vision and hearing the most obvious targets. Although I have read that there's uh, work being done on getting sense through your mobile phone as well. But we'll move on to that later. So, eco-psychologist Michael J. Cohen puts the number of senses at our disposal at 53. And there's a lot of confusion as to how many we have. And the reason is there's a lot of crosstalk between sensory systems, making it tricky to work out where one ends and one begins. But all neurologists would count and agree on that we have 9 senses. So, on top of the top main 5, there's thermoception, which is the sense of heat, although there's also a debate of whether the sense of cold may be its own separate sense. There's nociception, which is the interoceptive system, which gives us the ability to feel what is happening inside our bodies, such as hunger, fullness, thirst, heart, breathing rate, itch, nausea, sleepiness, you name it. You've got equilibrioception, which is the perception of balance. Vestibular input controls to our sense of body's posture in space and muscle tone. And finally, proprioception, and it tells us where our body is in space and detects and controls forces and pressures. So if you close your eyes and then you touch your nose, if you get it first time, that's proprioception in action, essentially. So here is how color can trigger your senses. So red is a high energy color that can trigger tension and anger associated with pain and can increase your heart rate, blood pressure, and appetite. But also remember, 8% of men and 4.5% of the world's population will be excluded by using the wrong red. You may have noticed that restaurants, food brands, and retailers use red as red grabs customers' attention, it increases hunger and creates urgency. So KFC, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, there's lots, have all used red to make the audience feel hungry, while Netflix and Marvel use it to show excitement. Food takeouts and delivery platforms are all very clever at triggering our hunger and thirst through language and colour, but they rarely use blue because blue has actually been shown to make people less hungry. Yellow can cause sensory overload and be overstimulating due to its colour intensity, but it often appears low contrast when paired with white, as we all know. Yellow, remember, is used to alert us. So when you think of yellow caution tapes, hazardous or toxic chemical signs, the keep out sign, the wet floor sign, they're all in yellow and they all are used to tell us something to avoid a problem. So people are very cautious of that colour. However, in UI, yellow suits websites targeting at younger youth, fashion, entertainment, etc. But in situations regarding seriousness or trust, yellow shouldn't be used. Pure white can cause increased anxiety levels due to the lack of comfort, negative association with hospitals, and medical trauma. In low light, a white website may be too bright for or glaring, making users uncomfortable. So white must be balanced with other colours to avoid eye strain. When we consider UI UX, color can trigger temperature changes for some users, just like walking into a room painted in warm colors or cool colors, or like the Netflix burning log fire can actually make people feel warmer. Copyright language choices can also trigger anxiety, leading to heart rate increase, and of course, so can those dreaded timed checkouts. So some people, including me, are just more sensitive to their senses. So, how do you make your website friendly in order to improve your marketing accessibility? Here are a few things you can consider. So, autoplay videos mentioned before, please can we stop this happening? When it happens, it's really disorientating. So, I just close the window and stop using the site altogether. Same goes for LinkedIn profile videos where people do that, or autoplaying social videos. To be honest, the slightest thing like someone opening a door can make me jump out my skin. No different to your newsletter promo that slides in unexpectedly. If I'm not prepared for it, my heart rate increases and I just abandon what I was doing. Keep language simple and avoid using slang or too many acronyms or jargon. It can be really cognitive fatiguing to continue try and work out what you mean. Keep copy blocks short and concise and let users manually change font sizes. Obviously, don't use a third-party overlay, and check how your copy reflows as high as 400%. Text, ideally use dark text against a light background or vice versa, obviously, to ensure sufficient contrast. Moving text, so many sites nowadays have banners with text that they consider to be their brand's USPs, but they obviously get lost if you can't read them at a glance. Carousels can be really, really overstimulating, so try not to do autoplay carousels. Obviously, be cautious, as I talk about a lot on LinkedIn, of having background images with overlaid text. If you can do it, consider darkening the background image right down or use a color block behind text. Include clear subtitles on your videos, but make sure they're in off black and white, and make sure there's a background to them. So many people don't include a background to their subtitles, so when the pitch changes, the copy gets lost. So I mentioned it being difficult to understand where one sentence ends and another one starts. Well, 1 in 23 people experience a persistent blending of senses, known as synesthesia. So, for example, colours are tasted, music is seen, and smells are touched. Many syntheses see numbers, words, and letters in colour, whereas everyone else might see them as black, for example. And the unique perspective can be insightful when designing. So, Anish Jumanji, who is design director at Microsoft, wrote about her lived experience. And she said, my team and I often laugh together when I can tell them sense something isn't aligned. The palette feels off, there's sensory overload happening. There's a common misconception that sound is what triggers those with sensory processing disorder. Actually, between 37 to 69% of autistic individuals are estimated to live with sensitivity to loud sounds. This is known as hyperacusis. Although there's less research on ADHD and sounds, initial studies show children and ADHD have a higher rate of sound sensitivity than neurotypical children. Since those with ADHD and autism often feel overwhelmed by too much visual or audio noise, this is exactly the same and can be applied to your UI. So look for ways to reduce the extra clutter on your page. Anything that doesn't move the user towards a singular goal should be removed or deleted. If a page has too many elements on it, just split it down into multiple pages to make the UX feel more relaxed. But not all sensitivity relates to sound. Every person's brain is unique. Some avoid websites with jarring colors, flashing lights, and moving parts, and others are just more sensitive to their senses. So I hope these tips so far have helped you give a sense of how sensitive our senses really are and how we can become overloaded, causing for me personally horrible side effects. Having sensory overload normally means having to take regular detoxes from digital, as brands just don't realize how sensory overload can have a very negative impact on your cognition. So earlier in the year, we conducted a survey which looked into how neurodivergent people face barriers on websites. So we analysed how consumer behaviour for neurodivergent individuals affected them, how they feel and interact with websites when shopping online. We asked them, how would you rate your overall experience in retail websites in terms of accessibility? 14% said very good and only 1% said excellent. We asked, have you encountered difficulties accessing or navigating retail websites due to neurodiversity related challenges such as sensory overload, difficulty processing information, etc. And 89% of participants said they had. We asked what were your specific challenges they face when accessing or navigating retail websites. And 85% of participants had executive functioning difficulties, 68% of participants had cognitive overload, 69% of participants had sensory overload, and 70% of participants had difficulty processing the information. We produced the report from these surveys, and the results were very clear that brands need to start considering their UX from a sensory perspective, as 50% of respondents to our survey said they would abandon their purchase due to the inaccessible nature of the website. We left it open and asked them roughly, some things of what they would like to see changed, and a few of them are here. So the option when you sign in to disable flashing ads and pop-ups, and an option to mute the vibrancy of glaringly colourful sites. Just providing simple options to enlarge text or change colours would really make an impact. Simple design, no pop-ups, clear instructions of what to do, and clear error messaging. And then finally, one person said they would like to see websites being built with sensory consideration at the forefront of inclusive design. So it's clear that these are customers you are losing if you don't make them feel welcome, but you design your website in a way that actively excludes them. So WCAG currently 2.2, in my opinion, fails because it doesn't cover the spectrum between minimum and maximum of sensory loading. For example, a minimum set of requirements could be an auditory sense alert or a haptic vibration. However, the same standards would also need to be set to create a maximum limit to avoid sensory overload. I had a stroke, as you guys know, and a brain tumour in the brainstem, and then subsequent surgery that affected my vestibular system. Now, people with vestibular disorders can be physically sick from viewing animated content online. I watched a great talk by Peachy Neri. If you don't follow her, please do, at the UX Copenhagen 2023. And she noted about 35% of US adults over 40 have vestibular dysfunction, which affects your balance. That's roughly 69 million people, or the population of Thailand. On top of that, 4% of US adults, or around 8 million people, comparable to the population of London, suffer from chronic balance problems. And additionally, 1.1% report chronic dizziness, and 80% of those people are 65 and older who have experienced dizziness. And UI animation obviously doesn't just affect people with vestibular disorders, it also affects 2.2 billion people with vision disabilities, 75 million people on the autism spectrum, 50 million with epilepsy, 78 million with dyslexia. So our digital devices are wonderful, annoying, and all sorts of in between. The lights, the motion, the print, the colours, and the noise can all challenge your already sensitive eyes, and it's when you are symptomatic, trying to scroll through an article on your phone or watch a movie on your tablet can be torture. Attending a Zoom meeting like this with multiple people talking and moving can be unbearable. And sometimes even texting back and forth can be dizziness. So sensory websites in particular are friendly for what you see and hear and how you navigate. Furthermore, sensory friendly websites make your information easier to understand. So, to conclude, here are a few things you consider that might help people with SPD or overload. So, allowing users to feel calm and reassured across all their sensory layers, whether it's copywriting, visuals, sounds, vibrations. Make sure you have a clean layout with ample padding and breathing space to reduce visual distractions and cognitive load. Sound and music motion to be used on very sparingly and on an opt-in basis. Obviously, provide options to adjust font size, line spacing, and color contrast, and avoid rapidly changing visuals that can trigger, as we've just talked about, sensory, epilepsy, vestibular, and balance. UI animation is very much on trend at the moment, and you shouldn't necessarily disregard it. We use it a lot, but just few things to keep in mind. So minimize them Minimize the animations or transitions as much as you can. Um, Allow users, obviously, the chance to opt out before they arrive at it. Provide options for customization, such as adjusting animation speed or turning off certain interactive elements to cater for individual needs. Lazy loading, which is when the page slowly loads, is great for optimizing page speed of large catalogs, but keep any looping at loading animation really simple when loading the tiles, and avoid loading the animation loops across every asset. So, for example, a separate loading animation, just one icon on the page will be absolutely fine. Animated field placeholders can be really overwhelming when you start typing and they're jumping up and down. So you just use clear field labels instead. Basically, only add motion to the communication if it's needed. If it's for the understanding of the copy, don't add animation for animation's sake. And luckily, this trend is very much over, but some websites still use the parallax effect. So that's a feature that makes the images seem more realistic by having the background move slower than the foreground. But this motion difference can be very, very unsettling. Also, colours that don't go well together can quickly overwhelm a sensitive audience and induce sensory overload. Um, hope well, I say luckily, it's quite an easy thing to fix. So when you're choosing colours within presentations, choose calm, neutral, or muted colours that will soothe participants, offering a calming and minimalistic aesthetic that appeals to users seeking tranquility in design space. Work with pastels, earth tones, and cool colours to minimise any sensory overload. Um, Combinations that can pose problems. Obviously, red and green we all know about. Uh, Tritonomaly, which is obviously the yellow blue color blindness. So these colors should be avoided or used with caution. But the use of green with blue, grey, black, and brown also is exactly the same for people with tritonomaly because they can't tell the difference between the green and the blue. The use of blue and purple or grey, as people with red green colour blindness can't see the red element within the purple. Um, and the use of green and yellow. So, green and yellow are next to each other on the red green axis. So, it can be too close together for some people to distinguish between. Block color backgrounds are also better. Gradients can cause huge problems. Again, this is where I think there's a problem. So WCAG mentions the minimum contrast, but it doesn't include the maximum. In my opinion, something that needs to change, as it can be overstimulating if boosted too high. So the maximum contrast of pure black and pure white is overstimulating for many users as it's just too intense. So I believe I would recommend the solution is to aim for a color combination that meets the contrast ratio, but in the mid range so that it's not too overwhelming. So here's an example here. So they both meet AAA. However, the top example was supplied by our client and it was triggering for our user testers. In the bottom, we reduced the saturation and made the color much more comfortable for the user tester to look at. And here's another area that WCAG fails people, in my opinion, by only mentioning the lowest threshold without considering the maximum. Many color combinations that pass can still cause problems. So intense colors such as red, yellow, or orange may be too bright for sensitive individuals. So just desaturate them to reduce the vibrancy. Colors can impact our mood positively and negatively, don't forget. The intensity of a hue can have as much of an impact as the color itself, and not all colors are beneficial. Various studies estimate 15 to 20% of the global population as having some form of neurodiversity, and studies have shown that 85% of neurodivergent individuals see color more intensely. This statistic highlights the importance of user testing color combinations wherever possible, because obviously a neurotypical designer will perceive color combinations in a much calmer way than a large portion of the end users. Another Important aspect of making your website more sensory friendly is focusing on the content, obviously, of your web page. It's crucial to use simple language in your copy. Remember, people have different levels of literacy, and the average reading age in the UK is 9. So many people read websites in their second or third language and may be less fluent. uh, Let users skim content without cognitive overload. We are all absorbing so much information each day that reducing the cognitive load of what you read and hear helps you to understand it. Use simple, less complex words and phrases so everyone can benefit. I know from experience that living with a vestibular disorder can be truly debilitating to many people, and UI design choices can really trigger vestibular systems without you even realizing. What you see as engaging, immersive, or creative is actually just vomit inducing, to be honest. Vestibular doesn't just cause dizziness from your auto playing carousels. Because of that, I'm also now very sensitive to light because of the vestibular damage. So when it's lovely and glorious outside, when the sun's shining, when it rapidly flicks through the trees, the flashes bother me, and I have to close my eyes. Or if I sit in the sun, it doesn't take me long at all before I start struggling in bright sunlight. Sunglasses just don't cover it. And I find the same with colours on the web that are too bright. And I find it hard to look at saturated colours for too long. Certain colours and colour relationships can be eye irritants, cause headaches, and wreak havoc with human vision. Your blindingly bright hot pink or red on everything is hurting my eyes, causing me eye strain and migraines. So pure yellow is the most fatiguing color, and the reason is it comes from the physics of light and optics. More light is reflected by bright colors, resulting in excessive stimulation of the eyes. Therefore, yellow is an eye irritant. So, like me, you can be disturbed by light exposure without developing seizures, but experience other symptoms such as headache, nausea, or dizziness. I'm going to show you a screen now, and I'm really sorry, Jodie, because I think this might affect you. Um, but it might cause people symptoms due to light intensity. So I apologise in advance. Now, these all meet WCAG thresholds, but cause me incredibly painful vision. It's just to illustrate that bright or neon can simply be too much, and why I believe WCAG needs to start including more about this in the next version. When I had my stroke, I lost my peripheral vision on my left hand side, which basically meant I walked into the walls on my left, and I struggled obviously to cross the road, and I really struggled to get back into my career in digital. But luckily, eye therapy has improved. It's miles better than it ever was. But however, after the surgery, I had diplopia, which is quite common with brainstem lesions, but it basically means double vision. And years on, again, it has improved massively, but I still suffer with the double vision, the peripheral loss, and cloudy vision when my eyes are fatigued. And this is heightened when I've been looking at a screen for too long and the information I'm reading, the video I'm watching, or the software I'm using cause me really painful eye strain. And spending so much time on digital devices causes the majority of people to experience eye strain. In fact, 70% of adults in the US reported experience symptoms of digital eye strain, and adults in their 20s are the hardest hit, with three-quarters of them reporting eye strain. The last thing I want to cover is we see millions of fonts every day, from the news we see, the news we read, the adverts we pass on the way to work, you name it, they're everywhere, aren't they? And the successful ones will stick with us, while those who miss the mark mean something isn't doing the job as it needs to. Font psychology is the visual and emotional reaction you have to a font when you see it. According to Albert Mehrabian, I really hope that's how you say it, rule of personal communication, 93% of personal connection is non-verbal, meaning ideas and values need to get across in the simplest way possible. Depending on what you're looking at, will have our thoughts, feelings, and actions impacted in different ways. So with fonts, choose a font that's obviously easy to read, a sans serif rather than a serif font, where each letter is easily distinguishable. Keep fonts obviously at a good size. When text is too small, you have to strain, obviously, harder to focus and read it. Small line heights, leading and tracking can also reduce readability, as it makes it hard for your eyes to know where to return to in the line break. Text that is too close together and difficult to read will trigger a negative reaction, while text that has an appropriate amount of white space and comfortable amount of spacing between the paragraphs and titles will feel more visually pleasing and comfortable to look at. Like I've said, break content up into short paragraphs, clear headings and bullets so that users can skim. Keep obviously at high contrast, because low contrast text means our eyes are straining even more so. Make sure your design works in both light and dark mode, as a lot of people find dark mode is less straining on the eyes. By making some small adjustments, a user will stay engaged for longer, read more about you, and in turn convert. Studies have shown that typography not only affects emotional reactions and behavior, but information retention and memory as well. Backed by this research, it'd be prudent to consider fonts as a frilly afterthought. Not only are they a major part of the design process, they also help us tell a better story. If you take time to understand font psychology, you'll realize that picking fonts isn't just about choosing the prettiest or boldest one. Understanding how people react to fonts and why they react in a particular way will help guide you on your quest to create a design or brand identity that truly resonates. So, a trend in marketing that I really wish wasn't as popular as it was is this handwritten script font. They're kind of used everywhere, to be honest, at the moment. And I get it; they add personality and give a human touch. But the flip side is a lot of these are inaccessible to many people. I find these almost illegible at times, regardless of whether it's online, print, or broadcast, because I can't distinguish between the joined up letters. Information leaflets obviously don't use script fonts. They tend to use clean sans serif fonts to help you absorb the information. But quite often, where these fonts appear is actually in the brand logo or taglines, especially if your brand name is a person's name. Broadcasters love to use this font as well with slogans, nameplates, recipes, or lists. But again, you can use a handwritten font. It's not that you can't, but choose them carefully. So some of these have less axes, meaning they're less slopey and more upright. Some have less exaggeration in the swashes, which are those curly things at the top and bottom of the letters. The less swashy, the better. Obviously, take time to track the words, adding a little extra spacing so it's easier to perceive the individual letters. Obviously, use sufficient color contrast and avoid having a busy background image so there's plenty of clear space around the letters, just as you would your logo. They just take longer to read, so keep them on the screen for a little longer, allow the viewer sufficient time to perceive and interpret what they're looking at. This is obviously just my personal accessibility issue with these font choices. Lots of people experience difficulties with other typefaces, so your font choice really matters. So I mentioned earlier I have photophobia, which is the actual definition is the fear of light. However, in medicine, it refers to the eye sensitivity to light, especially bright light. Um, so light sensitivity can be associated with several types of medical conditions, which include eye strain, intolerance of light, and excessive blinking. A lot of people with similar issues to myself and my brain injury can find the blue light from a computer screen particularly problematic, and users quite often adjust the settings on their computer monitors, like I do on my smartphone, to avoid the most severe effects. But you've got to remember this reduces the color contrast. So if not already not high enough, it's even going to be worse. We must avoid using large areas of contrasting colours such as red and blue or black and white. That creates a flickering effect. And instead, obviously, use softer or muted colours that create a smooth transition. Highly contrasting visuals such as stripes or checkered backgrounds are another culprit. Um, so what's the solution? I suppose is for knowing what to do with your design to ensure it's accessible beyond WCAG, and the answer is simply to use the test. It's important to test across different sensory profiles with users. The sensory design has such a wide spectrum. Get it right, and you can convey a personal touch in your look and feel while attracting and talking to a much wider audience. Designing for users with anxiety requires a thoughtful and intentional approach by simplifying navigation, using calmer colors and typography, providing clear feedback and guidance, including support and resources, and testing and iterating your design. You can create a product that is inclusive and accommodating for users with anxiety. As designers, it's our responsibility to ensure that everyone can use our products with ease. And designing for users with SPD and anxiety is an important step towards creating a more accessible digital experience. In summary, accessible design is essential because it acknowledges that people experience the world beyond the way that non disabled people do. Um, and obviously, we can create a more inclusive digital space that prevents discomfort and ensures everyone can engage comfortably. Now, this is what I love. In Germany, user testing is now mandatory by law, and it's a real win for sensory friendly design as it shows that the understanding that WCAG is an absolute bare minimum and starting point, and the user testing will ultimately decide if your website is accessible or not. And I'm really hoping the UK may one day follow suit.